And a good place to begin would be the beginning. Just who are your parents, Dad? And Mom, who are your parents?
My father was Richard, my mother was Lucille, and her maiden name was Barry. Yeah.
And Mom?
My mother was Hilda Poffenbaugh before she was married. My father was Louis M. Stoyer.
Mom, your family came from Crestline. Recall the lineage there from the Poffenbaugh side and bring us up to your mom and dad and a little bit about what your dad did. So start with what history you remember of your ancestry in Crestline.
Well, that
Names.
was just on my mother's side. She came
that's
from
right.
Crestline. She came to Toledo. My grandfather was a contractor, and he had the man that kept his money, his bookkeeper, had ran away with the books and all the cash, the bank, everything from the bank. And my grandfather was a broken man. That's
What was his name?
Charles Poffenbaugh. And they had a lovely home in Crestline, but they lost that. They lost everything. My grandparents, that is my mother's parents. So they moved to Toledo, and my grandfather, I don't recall what kind of a job. He had been a contractor, but I think in Crestline, but he ended up doing manual labor. But my mother often spoke of the fact that he was a broken man after that. He was never the same. And my grandmother carried the bulk of the responsibility for the 5 children. And my mother went to work at a coffee company on Summit Street, and some sort of assembly line, bagging the coffee or something like that. And she met my dad in Toledo. He was an apprentice. He was an apprentice electrician, and they started going together, and I think they married when they were both in their early 20s. And
Mom, tell us about your dad, your memories.
well, he was a big man, very tall, and he was as straight a shooter as any man could be, and that he tangled in times with my oldest brother because Ed had become quite carefree about scruples, and he just, when he left home as a young boy, when he went on the bum, as I mentioned, he left behind a lot of the solid rules, I guess you would say, that we had all been raised on. And he got into a lot of trouble as a teenager, and went all the way out to California just by hitching rides on freight trains.
And how did that compare with Uncle Cliff? What was different about Uncle Cliff?
Well, Cliff was just the opposite. He was a lot like my dad, very straight-laced, a very scholarly type of young fellow who always got top grades.
Took good care of you. He looked out for you.
Yes, he did. He looked out for both of my sister and I as the younger ones in the family of 4, 2 boys and 2 girls. The boys were the oldest. But I was going to say, with my dad, he had a hard time ever equating to my brother Ed, because Ed was just the opposite of my dad, where Dad was straight-laced, and he was an engineer, or an electrician, went into what do you call it when they go into learn a trade, an apprentice electrician at 15, and then he became a licensed electrician. And just one little aside, when I was at Augsburg Lutheran Church, there was a man that had come to tell about the history of the church, and he said, he pointed to me and he said, the pastor told me Lou Stoyer was your father, and I said, yes, and he said, I heard the name many times over the years. In different churches, he said, when they would be talking about the construction of the church, they would say Lou Stoyer was the electrician on the job, and everyone knew Dad's name as one who was, very conscientious about his work, and they said if he was the electrician on the job, and the Toledo Club was one of the places he wired as a young man, he said, we knew we would never have problems. So that was a good recommendation for my dad's
His work had integrity like he did.
Yes.
Mike, as Fran was telling you about Edison, you understand he left Toledo 16 without a dime in his pocket. They went to California and never missed a meal.
He had skill sets, didn't he?
He did.
He
But
honed his trade along
we
the
always
way.
talk about my one cousin came from Reno, Nevada to Toledo. No job, no nothing. He had a Tennessee credit card, a can of gas at a siphon hose, a can at a siphon hose. Huh?
He made his.
We used to talk about that. I mean, he told us about, well, that's the only way they could travel then.
Characters. Mom, tell us about Aunt Betty.
She and I were just totally different. 3.5 years difference. I was the younger of the two girls, and she really never had time for me. Sometimes she might let me go to the show with she and her girlfriends when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, but I'd hear her in the kitchen and my mother would say, she won't be any trouble, just let her go, I'll pay her way, just let her go along. And she said, yeah, but she always wants to know what we're doing and who we're going with. I was such a pest. So by the time I was 12 or 13, I had my own little group, and I didn't have to tag along with her anymore.
But then later on in life, she came very close to
Oh,
Mom.
yes.
Yeah,
By
I
the
recall,
time we
as
were both
adults, we were
married and
very-
having children.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there
we
was a
became
fondness
very
between
close.
them.
She was a good big sister then.
Your family, your three siblings, could not have been more different in many ways, and I'm sure they were alike in many ways. But Uncle Ed and Uncle Cliff really were the antithesis of each other. Uncle Ed had a very interesting background as a young boy, a bit of a rebellious, troubled youth. Tell us his journey. How old was he when he left? Up until he appeared on the front of one of the big magazines when he was in the
Yes.
war. Tell us about leaving home as a boy.
Well, in those days, when a young mid-teenager left home, it was because, excuse me, there was no work. There was no work at all for young guys. And a lot of them just hung around on street corners. But my brother Ed was the one that, what they called, he went on the bum. That is, he left home with a group of other young guys who could not find work, and they just roamed the country. He ended up in California, but every so often he would write my mother and let her know that he was all right. But between the time he left home and when he finally returned, we later heard of the many escapades and close escapes. But
How old was he, Mom, and how did he
he
travel?
was 16.
16.
Dropped
Well,
out of
they didn't
school.
drive out of town. They rode freight cars.
They rode the
They
freight
jumped
cars.
freight cars.
Jumped
They
freight
Jumped
jumped
the
trains.
cars,
Yeah.
of the freight cars.
At 16.
Yeah.
And droves of young boys were doing that. They're leaving their homes because there was no work, and just trying to find anything to earn a few bucks.
So he was a worldly guy.
He was a worldly guy, and I think part of that came from being on his own, leaving home and scruples and the various things that had been so much a part of our life with our mom and dad, who were straight as the arrows. They worried about him, and justly so, because he got in a lot of scrapes, and a lot of times they would get a telephone call from somewhere between here and California that they picked up a bunch of these young guys that had been hopping freights, and the railroad didn't want any responsibility for them, so they just turned them over to the police in whatever city they were in. And they'd throw them in jail for a few days, and then, they had nothing to hold them for except vagrancy, I think. And they'd turn them loose, and they'd hit the rails again, and that's what shaped Ed's whole later life, we felt.
And he did end up in the service.
Yes, he
served his
did.
country honorably. And
Yes.
tell us about that famed photograph, what you remember about that.
Was that Tarawa, Bob?
The Life magazine.
Mm-hmm. It was on the cover of Life magazine.
Okinawa, I think it was.
Well, you would remember that better than I. Just
Well, not
their ship docked quite a ways out from the shore, right?
Yeah.
And unloaded these guys.
Yeah.
And they waded in or swam into the beachhead, and he was on Life magazine. I've always saved that copy. And he had called home and told my dad that there were photographers taking pictures, and he said, "You might find your eldest son in one of those pictures," and we did. He made the Life magazine.
Wow. And Mom, you and Dad met
When we
you
were
teenagers.
about 15.
Okay, and what's your recollection of how you first met?
He was driving a hayride with a bunch of young high school kids, and I somehow got in the same crowd. And there were 2 seats. He drove the horses, and there was an empty seat, and I managed to get that empty seat.
Strategically found yourself next to him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Must have been the curly black hair.
That's what did it.
You remember where it was?
Douglas Meadows Riding Academy on Douglas Road, just a little north of Alexis Road, right near Bob's home, about maybe half a mile from his farm.
Oh.
And I lived in West Toledo
On Hoyles Avenue.
on Hoyles Avenue.
Remember the address?
3827.
All right, way to go. Dad, what was your first recollection of meeting Mom?
I didn't see her that night.
You were looking at the hind end of a team of horses.
That's right. That was my job. No, I remember her riding. In fact, at that time I was doing a little escort work at the stable. And she was in a group of girls that come out from the villas, and I used to see her. But then after it was all over with, in the afternoon late, we always had a fire in the little shed there where all the saddles are kept, and she would be in there waiting for her folks, her dad or brother to pick her up. Remember?
Yes, I do.
And I remember she always had shiny boots because her brother took care of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it was your love of horses, Mom, they took you to the stables, and that became one of the best moves you ever made. That's
Yes,
where you
it
met
was.
Dad. Yeah.
I loved it, and Bob used to come over and be the escort, take maybe 10 or 15 girls out on a trail ride through the woods, and he was always at the head of the group, and we girls jockeyed for the position to be right behind him.
Nobody told me.
He always says that now, but he was aware.
I'll bet he was very aware.
He was
I'll
aware.
bet he was very aware. So just recall about your dating before you went into service. How long did you date? Did you call it dating?
No, well, we went out, as not every week, but I saw her probably every other week anyway. And we never went steady or anything like that, until when I come home from service, we got engaged, just like that.
Well, how did you stay in touch when you were in service? It was all
Mom
through
used to write
letters
me.
back then, right?
Mom used to write me a lot.
His letters then were censored. Sometimes it would just start out, "Dear Fran," and
Da-da,
then
da-da, da-da.
and then his signature.
Do you still have any of those?
Oh yes, I have them all.
I don't think I've ever seen them. So that.
Well, I don't put them on display,
Well,
but I have them.
we'll read them someday when you're gone.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll
You could
respect
read
the
'em now.
confidentiality of that. So, Dad, remember for us your joining the Navy. What was your motivation? What did you know? Why did you serve?
You ready? Well, joining the Navy, that was, of course, I was 17. My two older brothers were in already, and that was the thing to do. You know what I mean? Fight the war. I mean, get her over with. You didn't want to be home when everybody else was over there. So I wanted to go in the Navy because I didn't know about all this sleeping out and hiking and such as that, So that's why I joined the Navy. And because my two brothers were in the Navy ahead of me, But as far as the war being over, our ship was too damaged from the typhoon that we had to go to port in Pearl Harbor to get repaired. And when it went over, we couldn't believe it. You know what I mean? Now, you understand, every sailor, they dismantled the guns and just start firing all the guns aboard ship. I mean, our 20s and 40s, all the ships in the harbor were just, the whole sky was lit up with shells, flares, Of course, if you fired anything like that, you go to jail for life, But nobody cared. The war was over, That was August the 15th. I'll never forget it,
Wow.
Where were you, Bob?
Pearl Harbor. We just pulled in there a few days. I was a fire patrolman, 3rd class. And what a fire patrolman is, you control and fire the guns. I was at the clear of the top of the ship in a director, which wherever we moved around, we took the guns with us, you see. And the guns that were pointing towards our own ship, they were discarded, They kept switching them. And wherever we get on a target, we had a pointer, trainer, and I was on the optics to bring the diamonds in to spot them. And alongside of me was a radar man. He had the same thing. He would get the blimps, on the target, And all of it, we would send right down to the plotting room, and they would solve a solution to that gun, how much they had to lead, how much they had to go forward, and the distance for that shell to explode right there. Now, I mean, our computers were probably 6 foot long, 3-4 foot wide, and 6-8 guys around them just spinning knobs. I mean, it wasn't everything. Almost want to say it was manual, but they did it. They did it, Yeah. But that was my job, and one of the wonderful things about it was, to me, I was at the top. I saw everything, When Mike speaks of a typhoon, nobody was on top side. You're all in your, but us up there, And we would roll, and I would be laying over the side of the ship, the water. I mean, just back and forth, They figure if we went any further, we'd have lost our big turret, so it slid off, Yeah.
Tell us about seeing some of your ships go down right next to you in a typhoon.
Well, yeah. Well, we wouldn't see them; they were gone. I mean, they were smaller ships than ours, and they would ride the swells. you know, and some of the swells were so big that they right straight down, you know.
Right alongside of you.
Well, when you say alongside of you, you know, we're miles apart, you know. I mean, you get 30, 50 ships, you know, you're not
How
bunched
big
up.
were the waves?
Oh, 50 foot, as we could guess, you know. Our ship is 673 feet long, and it had two big turrets up in front, and we would be dipping over our second turret. Our sister ship alongside of us, when I say alongside of us, I might have been a mile away, she snapped 132 feet of her bow off, you know. Just in our bow, you know, all the time there's guys down there welding. They cut all the tracks off for the ammunition tracks, taking those bars and welding them on to save her, you know. And that's why we had to go back. We couldn't fire our guns anymore, the big guns, because of the seams were so split so bad, you know.
Dad, one of the memories I recall of you in the war was a specific time when you identified a plane as the enemy, and they were waiting for the final, and you were,
Yes.
they were, recall that time.
I was on, of course, our ship was at the last one of the fleet, see, and here comes this plane in. And when I say plane in, your naked eye, it was a dot, if you could, you know, there's no obstruction, you know. Well, anyway, every ship in the picked it up friendly, you see, and I kept identifying it as a Jap Zero, you see. And we went to general quarters, and it was still coming in, you know. In fact, they released everybody from general quarters, and this finally, I could identify it. I knew what it was, because that was my job, you know. And our officer, he was asking permission to fire, you know. We had to go through. You just didn't fire, you know. And finally, the plane made a turn. When it turned, you could see the great big meatball on the side, you know.
Meaning?
Well, it was, of course, it was out of range, you know. I mean, the time they went to general quarters and everything else, it got out of there, and none of our planes could catch it, you know.
The meatball was,
The rising sun on their plane, you know.
and that's
Yeah.
when you,
And I remember another time a plane coming in. We was making strikes at Saipan, I forget what it was, and this plane came back. The Jap plane, Jill, came back with our fighter's plane. He got in there and they didn't. He just hit off the side. They didn't recognize him, you know, because they don't see behind their back, you know. And I was on him with our optics, you know, but you couldn't fire because he sweeped right down, dropped a stick of bombs on the Franklin, and took off. And you couldn't fire because you hit another ship, maybe, you know. And of course, our planes, they went after him. They couldn't catch him. That Jill was so fast, it had just almost skipped the water. It'd be so low down, you know.
Did you ever see one of your ships in your fleet go down?
Oh yeah, the Liskin Bay. She was right alongside of us, and when I say alongside of us, you know, that might have been a half mile away, you know, and we would pick up an object every so often. This was at night, and finally, it was a sub, you know, 'cause we had the best radar of our, because we were new, you know, and that's what it was. It was a sub, and it shot several torpedoes at it, and that blew up. It went down, I think, in 7 minutes. They said.
What did you recall seeing that night?
When as I looked out and saw it, you know, it lit up, you know, and hell, the bow was sticking up there like that, and hell, everybody was running up on the bow because I was on optics on it, you know, and that blew up, and that was about
Did you
it.
see men?
Oh yeah, yeah. They lost 1,100 that night. Yeah. Yeah.
Mom, do you remember hearing the war was over?
We first got the word through the blade. And I think I mentioned,
X-rays.
pardon?
The X-rays on the corners, didn't you hear them?
Yes, I was going to say, we were coming home from the Westwood Theater, and the newsboys were on every corner, they had a pack of, rolled papers under their arms, and they were holding one up that had said, "War is over," and in finer detail, it told.
How were they announcing it? What were they saying?
X-ray, X-ray, the war is over. I mean,
They tried to.
that was an extra
get people-
dollar for those guys,
Yeah,
you know.
they were trying to
They were
sell
only
as many
pennies,
papers.
I mean, a very small amount, you know. But that was a big thing. That's where we got our news in those days, was X-ray of papers, you know, on the
An
corner.
extra edition came out.
Anything happened, you know, there was always an extra edition on this corner. Yeah.
Well, any memories that come to mind about the war and just Dad's being away, and any angst you had about will he return? Because a lot of men didn't.
You're right. I knew he was in Task Force 58, which hit the headlines of the Toledo Blade almost every evening. It was one of the main task force that hit
Well,
all the islands.
Yeah, but sometimes if the task force was a different number, it was the same ship in operation, but a different command. You
So
see.
I wouldn't always know that was one way to keep track of him. My brother was also in the Navy, and Ed's ship was in the same task force. So often when we saw that Task Force 58 hit the Aleutians or whatever the island might have been, to take away from the Japs, I knew that Bob and Ed were probably in the same unit and yet never ran across each other. Of course, it was very uncertain that they ever
Well,
would
we
have.
were never on ground together, Mom,
Mhm.
you see.
I understand.
Recall that day when you first saw him return from the war. You described it once before. You were, with great clarity, you remember the car ride in to the bus station, the train station where it was. Just recall that.
Train station, yes. His folks were there, and I was there also, and the whole unit tumbled off of the train, and somehow Bob found his way over to our little group where your mom and dad were and your brothers and sisters, and it was a joyous reunion, but almost hard to believe. We had waited so long for that day, and it was hard to believe that it actually was happening.
How'd you get down there? Streetcar?
I drove.
Oh, did
Oh,
you?
no, I drove.
Yeah.
What do you remember about coming back to?
Well, I just remember seeing people, you know, home, family, you know. I was thrilled to death. But we didn't stay long there because they took us right out to the naval station to program us for discharge, you know.
Were you engaged at this time?
Yeah.
So you got engaged while you were.
Well, just after the war was over, I came home just for a week or something. Then I went back and made that trip to Japan, to see.
So you were engaged then.
That's when I came home, yes. Yeah. Then when I came home the last time, that's when I bought her a ring. At the naval base, no taxes on it.
He and John McSweeney went.
You still got that
Shopping
ring?
together.
Mom, you still
Oh,
have
yes.
that ring? Does it still fit?
This is the
That's-
diamond, but I've had to have it reset several times.
She just wore it out.
So the ring that Dad bought, you still have that same ring?
The same diamond. I've had several new settings as my fingers got bigger, like during a pregnancy, my hand would get much bigger.
Well, we had her wedding ring and her engagement ring made in one
together.
ring.
So there were 6 small diamonds that were in a diamond ring for my wedding ring, and the single solitaire.
It's not a big ring, but the jewelers always spoke about it as a quality, didn't they, Mom?
Yes.
And Mom never knew what I paid for it. Did you?
He and McSweeney went diamond shopping together.
Wow.
He had a girlfriend, Rosemary, waiting for
Yeah.
him.
Well, how about the ring you bought for Dad?
Well, that came before we married. Just a wedding band, which
Oh.
he doesn't wear anymore. It got too small.
I remember. I remember when you hit it with a saw one time, Dad.
I get
Yeah,
it caught
that-
on a nail, put stitches in there. I said, that's it.
Well, one time it hit a saw. You may not remember, but
Yeah.
you showed me the mark on it where
Oh, yeah.
it just nicked,
Nicked it, yeah.
The thing put a mark in it. Yeah.
But I don't know if I would tell you, that ring only cost a little over $100.
Wow.
Overseas.
That was a lot of money back then.
Well, not only that, but there was no taxes on it.
Wow.
There was jewelry tax and all that at one time, Oh, probably half the.
When you think about your marriage and where you are today, you think back over it. Who are some of the people that come to mind that were role models for you about how you wanted to live your life as a spouse and as a parent to each other's children?
I think what comes to mind first, and I'm sure Bob would agree, is his parents and my parents. They each had the partner that they married initially as young people. And I just knew that's the way I wanted our marriage to go, that as we had family and the years rolled by and the family grew up, that we would still be together, which we are. 64 years,
Yeah.
am I right?
In September.
In September. It'd be 64 years.
Wow. Dad, how about for you?
Oh, I don't remember picking out a couple of as role models. I was just so busy on my own life, and we were, as Mom said, we were practicing as normal as what you saw your parents do of budgeting and making ends meet and family. As probably my parents was a role model. Things that they did that I knew I wasn't gonna do, right, Mom?
Yes, that's true.
Dad, what did you admire most about your mom?
My mom, she's very charitable. She was very charitable. Isn't that right, Fran?
Oh, yes.
And straightforward. I mean, there was, she was a calm lady. Never got really upset or anything. Yeah.
Well, her virtue of charity is legendary in the family for the people that she took in.
Oh yeah.
Some of your memories about who those characters were, how long did they stay, what were the conditions?
Well, the first first couple we took in, there was in the Depression, he was working a little bit, and they stayed with us for a period of time till they got, when I say period of time, probably a year and a half.
Lived in your home?
Pardon?
They lived in your home with you?
Oh yes, I was young then. And then,
Do you remember their names?
Loveline.
oh no, excuse me, Mom.
No.
Benson.
Oh.
Benson. And then over on the farm, that was the farm, I remember first couple we took in was probably Aunt Gertie and Uncle Jess. They lost their property, you see.
During the Depression.
And so I remember we moved them horse and wagons to, and they stayed several years until Uncle Jess got a job at the golf course as took care of the nursery and stuff, the trees and bushes. Then after that, I remember we were sitting at the table during the summer, and here comes Lucia Green coming around the house, and she come in our house bawling. They just evicted her. I mean, now she had to get out. So again, Mom says, take the wagon, horse and wagon, go and load up her belongings, and brought her, stored them up in the barn, you know. Then years, she was with us quite a while. Then finally she met an old guy who lived in the neighborhood, and she married him, so she moved out. Then, as you know, during the war, then she took in old Mrs. Liebel's brother. He was a foreigner, very broken English, worked at the factory, because everybody had a job in the factory then, but spoke many languages. You know, I didn't really know him. I was gone at the time, but I used to hear about him. And he got killed out in front of our house. He, you know, worked a midnight shift or something, walked out in the road right in the traffic, you know.
Wow.
Then my dad, he'd bring maybe old Paulie Hausman. He would always look for a place for the winter. You know, he'd come home from a sail with my dad, never left.
Your mom washed his clothes?
Oh, I remember, you know, he was kind of carefree. I remember my mom says, Paulie, get in there and take a bath and throw your underwear out. and that's what happened, you know. And she would clean them up, you know. And, yeah, Uncle Larry knows more about Paulie because Larry was the only boy at home at the time.
And Mom, your mother was legendary also for her charity.
Yes, she was.
And I remember her telling us stories about the food she would put outside for the homeless.
Oh, yes.
The men trying to feed their families. Can you remember anything?
I definitely
Specifically?
remember that was during the Depression days, and many men were out of work, and they would come to our back door and ask if they could have a meal in exchange for cutting the grass or any simple thing that might be needed around the home. And my mom always said, my husband takes care of all that, but do come in and have a bite to eat. And my dad countless times would come home in the late afternoon to find a strange man sitting at our kitchen table, and it would upset him, and he'd scold my mother for inviting perfect strangers in, but she never stopped doing it. She felt that was something she needed to do, to share what we had with those who had nothing. So that was a big part of my growing up. I remember that many times. Coming downstairs, walking through the kitchen, and there was a perfectly strange man sitting there. My mother was waiting on him as if he had been a king.
Wow.
To be sure he had a good meal before he moved on.
Well, those are things that both of you brought into our family, because although we didn't go through the Depression, every one of us can think about some of the kids or adults that would show up at our place, not just out of interest to say hello, but I think Donnie Hawn and his little sister
Yeah.
Gail
Oh, yeah.
ate dinner at our house.
Well, he
5
ate,
out of 7 nights.
well, he stopped coming because Mom made him eat his peas
I
one night.
remember that.
Yeah,
I remember that.
he wouldn't eat
yeah.
peas, so she made him eat her peas, he wouldn't come back.
Well, jumping ahead, one of the favorite stories in our family that's always been interesting is Grandpa McCartney's death, because he was such a colorful character, and the way he died was pretty unique. Can you recall that, Dad?
Well, I wasn't there, you see. I was on a job, and they come out and told me my father passed away, you know. And only thing I could tell you is what they told me, you
Now,
know.
what did they tell you?
Well, you know, the week before his death, he had this horse that $50 horse, or you know, and he babied that horse for a year, and finally he got him ready as best you can at home, and he put him in a race, you know, and he was kind of sponsored a little bit by Paulie, no,
Clara Barton?
no,
Mike Collins?
no. Well, anyway, I can't remember. It'll come to me. And they put him. He was a distance horse, I guess, and they put him in a short race just for workout, you know. And he broke, not bad, but failed behind, and he finally at, I think it was 3/4 or something, and or 5/8, you know. And towards the end, he was coming on, you know. And so they figured, well, we'll give him a little more distance, and next week then, or right back next week, and a little more distance. Maybe it was, I don't think it was a mile, maybe 3/4, you know. And he broke the same way, just lay on the back, you know. Finally, he came on the end, come on a full finish, you know. And before the results, my dad, as you go out and pick up your horse, you know, he had his horse, started, lead him off, and he dropped over dead with a heart attack. Yeah.
Where was this?
Fort Miami. And Dick Crown's friend at Reed Cemetery, mortuary, picked him up, you know.
Well, who was the old boy that had the tavern? He was with your dad the day he died, or was that the track that day?
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of the
Jim, and it's right there on Holland, Sylvania, and Brent. I don't think he's there anymore.
That bar's still there, that
Yeah,
restaurant's still
I think
there,
he's gone, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
And how did his dad die?
Playing cards. Played cards every night at his home. Him and about 2 or 3 other cronies smoked their pipes. My grandma, the house was blue with smoke from all those guys smoked pipes, you know. Thought she was out of her mind, you know. But finally, you know, he was playing cards and he just heart attack. And he was only in his young 60s. My dad was 61, too, you know. Then my brother Bill, you know, they started right in the family. He was 61, I think, when he had his, you know.
And here you are, 85.
85.
85, wow.
That's because of the surgery and medication, the awareness of your health, you know, to take care of you today.
Let me jump for a moment to a couple other memories. Dad, recall the time that maybe a team of horses went over the side of the bridge.
Well,
Tell us, who was that for?
there was anger. We had to move Ann Gertie home because she lost her house, you know, and
She was moving in
so
with your
Mom
family.
says, you know, go and pick up Ann Gertie's stuff and start hauling it, you know. Well, it just happened. It was Smith lived up on the hill there. He was there with his team of horses, and he volunteered. Of course, he had a crippled colt and a blind mare, and here we are, across a load of Ann Gertie's, all her canned goods and everything, and all of us that colt saw the water and jumped sideways and knocked the blind mare in the creek, you know, and pulled him in. Here goes the wagon, and we jumped off, you know.
You're crossing the bridge.
Yeah, and that was the bridge on our own farm, you know. And Dick was out there with a team of horses cultivating or something. So he quick unhitched the horses and brought them over, hooked a chain around, pulled the wagon off. The horses were just, well, I got down there and unhooked the harness and cut what I had to, you know, and they were running up and down the creek, you know, couldn't get out, you know. And
But we got hurt.
Nobody had hurt. Old man Smith, he thought his horses were going to die. He's going to have to shoot them, you know, I remember. But they really didn't have a mark on them.
One more story about a team of horses. Tell us, even if you weren't there, about who slipped whose reins and what was it about?
Well, that was Claire Barton and Whitey Hickle. And evidently they got into it at his place, and he lived probably a half a mile east of us. And Claire come down there, you know, they were drinking all the time. And here comes Whitey Hickle with his team of horses down the road, you know, nice.
Alexis Road.
Down Alexis Road, wasn't that big then, you know. And Claire Barton jumped out there with his knife, and he cut the reins off those horses' lines, you know, and hey, sent them down the road. I didn't see it, but there they were going to find the horses ran out of gas, you know. Yeah.
Talk about a runaway freight train.
Oh, those guys. I remember one night when he kept his horses at our barn for one period, and Mom and I were married then, and Mom called me. You know, those guys were drinking, and they were going to have a pulling contest or something. This was late at night, dark, and Mom called me, and I went out there. I ran them all out.
Your mom.
My mom called me.
Your mom called them.
I told them, get the horses, get them out of here now.
So little old, gentle, kind Bob could be pretty fiery when he had.
Well, they upset my mom, you see. I mean, they loaded up with just a crabbing, hollering at, you know, begging, you know, get them out of here. Put an end to that, didn't we, Mom?
And they always called him Bobby. This Claire Borton and the whole bunch of them. It was Bobby this and Bobby that. And they would say, oh, Bobby's on his high horse again, ran us all out of the barn, and just, they hated to see Bob coming. And Bob, it would have taken two of Bob to make one of them. They were big, burly guys, but they jumped when Bob came in the driveway. He'd get a call from his mother.
I just wouldn't stand for it, you know. My mom didn't want it, you know.
Well, when you think about your backgrounds, Mom, you were raised Lutheran German.
Yes.
How did you merge with a Catholic Irishman?
Well, in the beginning, Bob's sister, Pat, who was a year older than Bob, would invite me to go to Mass with her on Sundays, and I would often do that, and that was sort of an introduction to the Catholic faith. And as time went on, Bob was away in service, and I went to talk to our Lutheran minister and told him I was going to be marrying a Catholic when the war was over and Bob would be home. And he said, that isn't something you want to do. He was a staunch Lutheran pastor, and he had little or no use for Catholics, which I always felt badly about because I thought highly of him, and yet he never spoke well of Catholics. But more than anything, he said, all the children you have will have to be raised Catholics, and they will go to church with their husband, their father, your husband, and it will put a gap between you and your husband. And what I hadn't told him was that I had already begun taking instructions with one of Dad's priests and was fully in favor of becoming a Catholic. It took almost a year, 9 months. Bob was gone. He didn't know I was doing it, but when he came home on leave, I told him that I was being accepted into the Catholic Church at the cathedral down in Collingwood with a large group of other converts, and that's when I made the big step. And my family, my mother and dad were great. They said, you've known Bob long enough, and you've gone to church with he and his sister, and if that's what your choice is, it's all right with your dad and I. So I had no obstacle to overcome with my family.
Do you remember your first job?
Yes. LaSalle's in the girls' department, second floor, selling girls' clothes. But that didn't last long. I was only there a year. And then I moved on to the France Stone Company in their offices on the 18th floor of the 21-story building down at the corner of Summit and Madison and Summit.
Isn't it interesting how with great clarity you can recall
I know.
that
And
precisely?
I was working there for 4 years. In the meantime, Bob had come home from service, was fully discharged, and we were making plans to be married. And I worked there maybe a year and a half after we were married. And then I left. And
Can I correct you on that?
yes, please do.
If I'm not mistaken, about a few months after marriage, you told me you were expecting. And you know what you did?
No.
You quit your job. I said,
Well,
what?
I do remember that. I left that out, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were getting a new assignment.
I was
was-
getting a new
You got
assignment.
promoted
I
in
was
motherhood.
getting ready, making a nest, weren't you?
Yes, yes, I was.
Dad, what was your first off-the-farm job?
Oh, Ottawa Rubber Company. Right after the war, they called me and wanted, a new company just starting out, and I think I worked there 2 weeks. I worked the first week, then I gave them a week's notice. I wasn't gonna work in a factory. I mean, you come home, rubber dust all over you, and you were just out of production. So then I come home and I started. It was spring, and so I started. I bought a team of horses and I plowed the farm up and I planted sweet corn, tomatoes, and I do jobs with my team, And then fall came and
You dug basements too.
well, I really didn't dig basements myself. I helped on them, you see. And so here, the fall harvest of corn was gone, tomatoes, so I went over to Little Scales and they hired me. I worked there a year. A nice, clean place and all that. But I look around and I see those guys on that machine, 30 years, pulling the same lever. Man, I fought well, at the same time I was fighting to get in the apprenticeship at the carpenter union. And Eddie Cave, he was taking me down to, finally said, you have to have a job first. Old Bill Sherman called me and says, got a job. And that was a union apprentice, So I give Toledo Scales a notice, and I worked there probably a year, and I started my apprenticeship with Bill Sherman in the door company.
I just remembered, this is maybe before you were an adult, you were a boy and you took a job as delivering ice.
Oh, well, I was freshman in high school. I had an ice route. I forgot about that.
Tell me some of the details about that.
Oh, well, see, in those days, everybody had ice box, or not everybody, but a lot of them did, and they always put a card in the window, 50 pounds, 75 or 100, and I would pull up there with a truck with unload the canvas and chip off what they want to carry it in, and they would
On your shoulder.
on your shoulder. At that time, now I didn't weigh 129 pounds, or I think that's when I got married.
Yes.
And I carry 100 pounds of ice, And I remember swinging it off my shoulder. I had to go up my toes so it wouldn't hit the floor, And then put it in there. Of course, you thought it was a job, We was thrilled to death,
Where was your route?
Most of it was Point Place. because all that Point Place area, those were like cottages then. You know, near the water, they were up on stilts, you know, and there were cottages.
And most everyone had an ice box rather than a refrigerator in those days.
Well, we did have, a few of them had refrigerators.
Mom, you don't remember, you were too young, but your accident where you pulled the boiling water, no? What was, how did you, gosh.
Register.
It was a register, that's it.
I was 6 months old. I was born in September, and this was the early part of December, so my mother said. So I was only about 4 months old, and she had laid me on the Davenport, or a large chair, I think, pulled it up to a floor register, and my dad had built a terrifically hot fire in the furnace because it was very cold outside. And my mother always said I never moved once she laid me down as an infant. But that day I moved. I flipped off of the couch, or off of the chair, I think, onto the hot furnace, or the hot register. And she said I turned, as she was running to get me, I was turning my face from side to side because of the heat. And that's where that scar came from 84 years ago.
Dad always thought it was one of your beauty marks.
He never complained. And I
Well,
did.
I never, I saw it, but I never really saw it, you know, because that didn't mean anything to me at the time, did it, Mom?
You didn't let me think it did.
No,
Well,
it didn't.
Mom has many qualities, but when you think about one or two that stand out most, that attracted you to Mom, that she has cultivated even more throughout her whole life, what are they?
I remember her, she talked to different ones, teachers and all, about her scar, and her mother took her to Detroit to a plastic surgeon, you know, and he talked her out of it. She didn't need it fixed. Remember, Mom?
Yes, I was in his office about an hour, and he just asked me a lot of questions, how things went in school, did I have a lot of friends, did I go on dates, and just to get a feel of me, because he had not known me until I went to that appointment with him. And after about an hour, he called my mother in, and she said, well, what do you think? Can we set up an appointment for the surgery? And he said, there won't be any surgery. He just said,
Go ahead.
you're 16 years old. I think I was 16 at the time. And he said, nothing tells me that would affect your life or your circle of friends. He said, shook my hand. In fact, then he gave me a hug. He said, it was nice to know you, and bless you. God bless you. And that was it. My mother went home, and my dad wanted to know all about it, if there was going to be surgery in Toledo or in Detroit, and my mom told him there would be no surgery. The doctor advised against it. And that was his specialty, removing scars. And
So, what you saw in Mom was just an authentic modesty, humility. She certainly wasn't vain.
Like I say, after I knew her, I didn't see it. It didn't mean anything to me, you know. Didn't, you know. As now, her wrinkles bother you? You know.
So how do you describe that quality of Mom's that you saw back then, and how you've seen it play out in your
her
marriage?
quality hasn't changed, as you know. One of the things, I don't know if I ever told her, what impressed me so much on Mom, she was so kind to old people and kids. You know, little kids, she was always so kind to them, and old people especially, you know. She figured, And I figured, well, I get old someday. Huh?
That's what you thought.
Yeah, I'll get old someday. She's got, don't change, Mom.
Well, what has it been for you, Mom? One of Dad's qualities that you admired most, that you've seen him just continually embracing his whole life?
Well, I actually met him when he was about 15. We were both 15 at the riding stables, and he had a horse of his own. He lived about a half a mile from the stables, and he'd ride over every so often and take a group of girls out on a trail ride. And he was just very engaging, very friendly with everyone. And the girls really liked him because he was so friendly. He had a wonderful smile. And they could talk to him about horses, or they all took turns coming out of the group that followed him through on the trail. They took turns riding up alongside of him and talking to him. And then there were days or evenings when he would take hay rides out, and I was often in the group that was having the hay ride, and we'd kind of take turns sitting next to him. Whenever there was an empty space for a minute, there was just room for one other person, and we kind of took turns going up and sitting with him. And he was just always very friendly with everyone, and well liked, very well liked. That was one of the outstanding features of Bob. My folks liked him, my friends' folks liked him. He just was well thought of by everyone. Just a hard-working farm boy.
When you think about your marriage and the blessing it's been, what comes to mind as one of the events that really tested you as a couple? Not necessarily threatened your marriage, but it was really a difficult event or really difficult period in your married life that ultimately strengthened you as individuals and as a married couple?
Well, we never had we had stress, financial stress. I remember so many people owe me money, and I was supposed to pick up checks Friday to deposit, I made out all the payroll and everything, and none of them came through. Nobody would pay me, And I think at that time was $3,600 at one time, and here I was a fear of all my payroll bouncing, and so that was a stress. Of course, I got out of it because Dick Fandry was the credit union, and I didn't belong to the credit union, and I went to Dick, and so he signed me up right now, and
I remember that.
no collateral, nothing. $3,600 he put in the bank for me. Pulled me out of that one, But
So he could make payroll.
Oh yeah, those times, there were so many guys in the business, and so many, they get a draw, $10,000 or something. Maybe all their bills hadn't come in, and hell, they thought that was their money, and so they go buy another car or go to a cottage, and yeah. So,
Mom, how about for you? What was a really difficult time in your married life that you and Dad pulled together on?
I think it was a struggle financially. And as the children arrived and the family grew, it was definitely a financial struggle. But Dad would always say, "Don't worry, I can always get a job. I'll always be able to work." And he was very faithful about that for I don't know how many years. He worked 6 days a week around month after month, year after year, I should say, when other men would take off on the weekend and enjoy just some R&R Dad would always work on Saturdays, and that extra paycheck on Saturdays many times got us through, didn't it? When,
Kept you afloat.
pardon me?
Kept you afloat.
Exactly. So we were always able to pay our bills, and we just worked together. We always managed to clothe our family, send you to Catholic schools. That was a top priority. But we never had to pull you out of Catholic schools. And so that education was important. And we always pulled together. We've often, these later years, said, I'd say, Bob, there was never a time when we had a disagreement that I wanted to do anything just to hurt you. And Dad would say the same thing. We would disagree at times, and we struggled at times because we didn't see eye to eye, but there was never ever any bitterness in our discussions and our arguments, and there were those too. And we always felt we wanted you children to feel secure in knowing your mom and dad loved each other, and that I don't know, I'm hoping you didn't have any unhappy memories of us having a shouting match or anything, because that was important that we didn't do that. We always got through the tough times, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. Maybe we made them tough sometimes.
Well, that's
Yeah.
probably true.
But I got my lesson about tough times, you know. We were married a few years, and Mom needed a washer, Mom needed a dryer, needed a refrigerator. And, you know, you get credit then pretty good, you know. And I bought a new car. And all at once I found out my bills was more than I was making, you know. Man, that's when I picked up the tools, and I built garages, I poured concrete, I remodeled. I worked out of that slump, you know. And I said, I'll never finance again. I never bought a car, washer, dryer. Only my houses, I had to go through a bank on them. But that was it. We drove old cars till we figured we could buy another one. I never paid interest. Huh?
That's saying a lot.
Yeah, never. That was 1951, 52.
Well, when you think about the day you were married up until right now, when you think about one of the happiest times of your marriage, a day, an event, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Every day,
There were so many.
every day, we're so thrilled every morning when we wake up together. You know, don't we, Mom?
Yes, we do.
We thank God for another day, and I don't care how rainy it is or cold it is, it's a beautiful day. And our marriage has always been a happy one. Isn't that right, sis?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Never a time that we didn't wish we hadn't ever gotten together. Always had, every day was a good day.
Oh, yeah. What a life. We're thrilled to death.
Is there anything you'd want to give as advice? You've given us advice our whole lives by the example you've lived, and you've said things to us, but just what comes to mind now, what you'd want all your kids to heed?
I think loving each other, that's what kept Dad and I going. There was never a time that we wished we hadn't gotten together, hadn't gotten married. We were always very thankful for one another, and not that we didn't have arguments, we did. We're two different human beings, and we sometimes saw things differently, and had to work out of it just through talking about it and trying very hard to see one another's side. And that there was never a bad day as far as our married life together went. We were totally happy together. And
Your
that-
advice, Dad?
Well, financing is, you have to, probably your homes, you can't save enough money to buy a house, you know. It almost probably the same way with a car today, but my advice was finance. I mean, I never charge. I never will be charged from month to month on our cards now, but and I used to have guys work for me, you know, like Lester Johnson, a black guy. He would I found out he'd borrow around his car for the winter, you know, and I really frown on that. John, I'll let you have the money, you know, and but my success, I believe, is I never made big money, you know. We always had to work at it, you know. And I always felt if I made money, but I have toys, might ruin my family, my life, you know. That's what I think. Living a modest life was very success. Don't you?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you remember about raising Karen?
Well, I don't know about. Can I skip a little bit? I remember. We'll start from the bottom. Todd, we had a snowstorm. Mom and I were out of town, and Todd was going to keep the driveway open. Do you remember that? He got in my truck. He just kept driving around and around, and faster. Finally, that tree got right in the way, didn't it? Did you remember that? Yeah. Oh, I come home, smashed the whole side of it, wasn't it, Todd? Of course, then I had to go and tell Brown and Buck I needed my truck fixed.
Because they were part of your company.
Yeah,
Those are the memories.
those are the memories.
Any others of Todd?
No.
You remember him and his goat?
Oh yes, I remember his goat all day. But Mom would tell you about the. Mom used to haul Todd and the goat to different affairs, you know. Remember the one time the trooper stopped Mom for
Trooper stopped me,
no taillight or something?
pulled
And
me
he-
off of the closest exit on the expressway.
He saw that goat
And
in
it was dark out, and he just, what was your hurry, lady, for one thing? And then he said, by the way, you got a tail light out. And he was flashing his flashlight into the front. I think Todd was in the front with me, and he flashed his flashlight on the back, and here was this goat's face right up against the glass. What in the world have you got in there? And I said, it's my son's goat. And were we hauling him back from
From the fair.
yeah, from the fair.
How about Dan? What's a trait of Dan's, a story of Dan you remember? When you think of Dan.
I remember the time I had to go to school for him. Do you remember?
I do.
There was some guy who used to harass Dan, and they one morning or something, he took Dan's book or something, you know, and he used a 4-letter word against Dan, you know. Well, anyway, before that, and I said, Dan, this guy keeps giving you a problem. I says, drop him.
Let him have it.
Make him, you know, and he did. When he said that 4-letter word to Dan, boom.
Jim Schoen wrote a poem about it.
Did he? Well, anyway, of course, you know, they pulled Dan out of class. They had him in Penley Hall or something. They called me, and you know, and Livens, I think, was the principal then, and I says, I have to take all the blame. I schooled Dan how to make a friend, you know, and Livens let it off. That was it. Remember?
Oh yeah, that was a legendary
Yeah.
Yep.
event. What about Bridget? What do you remember about Bridget? Any stories there?
She was one of the more compliant ones, I have to say that. Not spunky. Karen had a lot of spunk.
Oh yeah.
Bridget was easier to raise.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
yes.
And I was always getting nice reports from the sisters about Bridget.
And Peggy was the same way.
Peggy,
I didn't hear
Peggy
anything
was
about Peggy.
compliant too.
Yeah.
They both had beautiful handwriting. That was a
Oh,
premonition
yes,
right
yes.
there. How about Denny?
Well, you know, he was. I remember when he went to Florida that time, and he got picked up on the street for. Of course, they said he was just stepping off the sidewalk on the curb. There was a penalty, you know. They threw him in jail.
Think there was more to that story?
Pardon?
Think there was more to that story?
That we
I never
never heard.
questioned it, but I let him stay in there to get his own way out.
I think he was with Marley, Orlandi.
I've actually since met the guy. He's become a friend of mine who threw his bail that night.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. How about me? You remember any stories about me?
Oh, I remember you riding off the fair with that little spotted pony, you remember?
I do.
And I remember John Minetta said he had a lot of go and no stop. Huh?
I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. We
You
might
rode
go to
him?
the fair, he'd just saddle up home, ride him to the fair. Everybody haul him, and we didn't have a trailer
We
then.
didn't have a trailer, and I was in that club with all the people who had nice horse trailers and professionally trained horses, and I rode my horse right down Key Street,
Yeah.
all the way in from Alvin Road to the fairgrounds,
Yeah.
because we didn't have a trailer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Then I remember you had that bad accident. You know, that.
Oh, right
Gim.
there in front of the old farm by the viaduct.
Oh, no,
Well,
that,
that
was
the
the
first
second.
accident. The second one was with Gim, when we
Oh,
had that
yes.
bad accident, when she was...
There was a drunken woman,
There
right?
was a drunken woman, yeah.
Yeah.
Eleanor Smith was her name. But how about Rob? What do you remember about Rob?
Rob never gave us any fits or anything.
The teacher called him the compliant one. He just was kind of easygoing.
Tell the story about when he got on the other side of the school building at St. Clement on his little tractor.
Oh,
This was before he was in school.
he was a
So he
runaway.
was riding his little tractor down St. Clement Court. He got the end of the court, which ended in the school playground there. And he just
Kept on going.
kept on going past the circular end of the court into the schoolyard, pedaled down the sidewalk from the school to the road, Tremainsville Road, which was a rather busy road. And I didn't
Well, I
didn't
heard he
know
was
we
sitting
missed-
on the curb, and the hearse went by.
Ambulance.
Ambulance
the ambulance.
picked him up,
What ambulance was it? You remember?
Birkenkamp,
Birkenkamps.
and so they brought him down. They brought him back. They knew he'd come from the court, so they brought him back to court, and he was just kind of moseying up and down there until they found a home for him. You know, remember that?
He went to several doors before he found someone that claimed him, and by then we had looked out and seen the hearse,
No, an ambulance, wasn't it?
the ambulance
Yeah.
from Birkenkamps.
I wasn't home at the time.
How about Mary? What do you remember about Mary? How was she as a girl?
Well, I remember when the Everly's every Thanksgiving playing football, and they always said, "Bring Mary," huh? She was a
This was in her grade school years, right?
yeah.
By the
yeah.
time she hit high school, she was learning how to wear a dress. But she was always
a
such
tomboy.
a tomboy.
She
Yeah.
ran around with those Anderson
I remember
girls,
she
and that's how
come
she
home-
wound up at St. Ursula.
She came home
That's
from
right, so
eighth
she
grade.
did.
She says, "Dad, I can beat every one of the boys up in my class." I bet she could too. She was tough.
Proud of that, wasn't she?
Oh, she was proud that she could beat every boy up. That's why she didn't have. I remember one guy took her bowling one night, and that was it. She beat him bowling, so he wouldn't take her out anymore. I don't know who that guy was.
I don't either. That was in high school.
Yeah. I remember when Karen, she was 2 years old, 2 year old. She fell off the chair and broke her arm.
16 months.
And she had her arm up in a cast. She said, ID Taubo. ID Taubo. I got
trouble, but she couldn't say it.
Yeah.
She said, ID Taubo.
Oh, yeah. But,
It was an airplane sling.
Karen was very active. I mean, she was, I remember Uncle Dick and Uncle Larry spoke about her. Very physical, active, and not a big girl, you know. Of course, she was a cheerleader. Did a nice job at that, you know.
That was high school.
High school, yeah. But I remember her. She was alert, wasn't she, Mom?
And spunky.
Oh.
She was spunky.
Real quickly, one word, Karen is spunky. Bridget was one word.
Oh, I have to think.
Well, Bridget never yelled or screamed or nothing. Everything was low key to Bridget.
Compliant.
And
Yeah.
Peggy.
Peggy was the same.
Peggy was compliant.
Denny.
Honesty.
Yeah.
Totally honest. When he
Denny was very
Hard
at
worker.
the
hard
fall-
worker.
Yeah, started young, hard worker.
Hard worker.
Yeah. Mike, same way. A lot of quality. Hard worker, you remember?
Yes, he was.
Ray Oakes, a young kid tending him. Huh?
You remember
Or Jim
him?
Manley. Those are hard jobs.
Those were hard jobs.
Hard jobs.
Rob.
He would fall in the compliant category.
A teacher's dream.
Yeah, we did get a lot of good reports about Rob, simply because he was so easy to get along with.
And Mary, one of her qualities,
Active.
very active.
Yeah.
Everybody liked, Mary was a favorite of a lot of older people. Lou McGrady, Brother Sebian, Bill
Oh,
Arnold,
you're right.
Still
Bill
is.
Shorman.
Still is.
Yeah, still is. And Dan, he was a buckskinner.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He skinned anything that crawled.
And I'll tell you, he skinned a mouse
I remember it.
and took pins and dried them out.
I remember it clearly.
Because, you know, he used to get on that old guy down the road there, kind of a hunter and a trapper, you know. Made cats,
Walter Ackley.
you know. Dan would make gloves and hats and stuff out of skunks,
And
possums.
Dan and Todd were tight as boys. Well, they still are tight as brothers, but as boys, they were only a year apart, and they hung together a lot.
Yes, they
They
did.
played famously together.
From
Yeah.
little kids on, used to go down to the creek together, and yeah, they were buddies.
In the creek.
In the creek.
Little Mom would have fits when they go to the quarry. You remember that, Todd? That was
That was
dangerous over
And
there.
you know, not everybody is the parent of Brutus Buckeye. What was that like?
Oh, I told every person I knew. I remember Dick Crown. He was so thrilled to know Brutus, so he took you in to his barber. His barber's a Buckeye man. Had his picture taken with Brutus, you know.
You got to see him in front of 100,000 people screaming for him.
Yes.
That was a
I
pretty
still
good-
tell people that.
We do too.
Yeah, when I see him wear old Buckeye and Brutus on them, I know all about him. My wife redid that hat for him.
Mom
Never-
made the head of Brutus Buckeye, yeah.
He didn't like the hat that came with the outfit, right?
Yeah.
And we made him one. And that was used then for quite a while after you were no longer Brutus, so the next one's in line.
Well, that's probably about it, isn't it?
Mom and Dad, just to cap off our conversation, be appropriate for you to speak to the highest priority in your life, your faith, the role that it's played in your lives, in your marriage, and now how you have included and passed on the tradition of the family rosary that we grew up with, that's still a part of your life, that you hope every one of your kids now embraces, and their love of the rosary and our Blessed Mother. But just a few of your thoughts about the power of the priority of your faith in your life.
Want to start, Dad?
Well, of course, the rosary is so important to us because, as you know, I grew up with the sisters, the Dominican sisters, all through grade school, and how, of course, they always carried a rosary. Said the five decade a day, you know, because a big long rosary. It's like 5 rosaries a day, remember?
Yes.
And so the power of it, you know, of prayer, we learned. All that was learned through grade school. And of course, my mom had it very deeply, and my mom had no education of religious education because she never went to a Catholic school and only went to the 8th grade. But my mom was very, very religious.
Very devout.
Devout. I mean, missing Mass, it was never thought of. You know, I mean, you just went to Mass, whatever weather it was. I mean, and nobody left that house Saturday unless there was plans for them to get to church Sunday morning.
Confession.
That's where I was raised, you know. So it's just natural for me about my faith, you know, because I grew up with it. And,
Mom, and the role your faith played in your life and still plays?
I became a Catholic at 21. I'd been raised in the Lutheran Church, but I was so impressed with Bob's whole family because they were very devout in an unpretentious way. There was never any touting about their faith. They just all lived their faith as a family. I know the girls, all the children went to confession on Saturdays. That was something I heard about Bob years before I even thought about becoming a Catholic myself, when we were just young teenagers. Saturday was something they all did, go to confession, and certainly Mass on Sunday was very important. Where I, as a Lutheran, there were times I didn't go to church on Sundays, and then times I did, but the more I became acquainted with Bob's whole family, and his mother especially, I knew the devotion to the Catholic Church was just so much a part of their lives. And I guess I fell in love with the whole family. I was falling in love with Bob.
Well, how important is your faith today at 85 years old? What role does your Catholic faith play in your life today?
It's everything.
wouldn't leave without her, would we?
No. And we are very, very happy to know that all our children have followed the faith. That's one thing. Dad and I can leave this world feeling you have all been so steadfast in your faith. And that was something, as a Lutheran, I wasn't the best Lutheran. I didn't go to church every Sunday. But having the chance to compare the Lutheran Church with the Catholic faith, there is no comparison. In my life, there's been no comparison because my family weren't devout Lutherans by any means, where the more I got to know of Bob and his family, the more I saw the importance of the church in their family. And I was happy when the day came that I became a Catholic, and together we have raised Catholic children, and I've been very, very happy and pleased about that.
How about the rosary? What role does the rosary play?
The rosary is important. We do have a rosary every Thursday night, and Sometimes there are just a few of us gathered, sometimes there's a room full. But we know the Blessed Mother smiles down on us when we're all sitting here saying the rosary. And there are many little preschool children that come with their parents, and we feel just the exposure to us all sitting quietly and saying the rosary, and their parents have taught them to be quiet at that time. And some are, picking up a rosary and learning to say the rosary along with us. But it's a gradual thing, but we feel the exposure has been very good for them. Isn't
Yes.
that right, Bob?
One night we had 32 here. I think the other night we had 20-some. And
Well, my last question, as we wrap it down right now, and as you have just spoken from the heart and the head about all these memories, how has it felt for you just to recall some of these things?
to bring up old memories, it makes me think, I'll probably think tomorrow, why didn't I tell them about this? We can't remember everything,
But we know just reliving them, as we tell them,
Yeah.
we can be reliving them. And Dad and I have often said, it's been such a good life. And to think we have both reached the age of mid-80s and we're still here, still have our right minds. All you children are instilled with the faith, and we thank God for that.
Well, you have been an awesome couple for us. You've given each one of your children an example to live by, and you have inspired many beyond just your own family. But
Yeah.
if you've done just your own family, you have served your purpose well. So thank you so much
Well,
for just
Thank you, Mike.
mining those memories and recalling some of the emotion and the thoughts behind them.
I
God
hope,
bless you both.
I hope there's more mission for us, don't you, Mom?
We'd like to be around a while
Yeah,
longer, the good
yeah.
Lord willing.
Yeah.
You can look at your mom. I may or may not use it.
Okay.
Just only because when people watch this, they're going to think, well, it sounds like they're in the room, are they?
Oh, good point.
Yeah, it might make it look like. Wait a minute, Todd, you really were Brutus Buckeye?
I was 86, 87. And Mom and Dad got to go to a.
We went to more football games. We went all the way to Texas to the Cotton Bowl for Todd's tickets. Remember, Todd?
No, that was a big deal, Dad.
It was a big deal.
That was back when there was only one Brutus Buckeye. Today I think they have 6, but Todd was it.
Yeah.
Did you have to audition?
Yes, there was cheerleading tryouts.
I remember Todd was going to the game and got caught speeding or something, Let him go because it was Brutus. Huh? And you saw him at the game, the officer, too, didn't
Yeah.
you?
I forgot that too.
There's quite a story there.
So, because whether we use it or not, it sure would be nice to get any of the kids that want to come over, just get a family thing
Good
with
idea.
the grandkids, as long as I've got battery power left. So,
You mean like right now?
Ta-da!
yeah, that's really pretty. Can you turn it a little more toward the camera?
Turn it a
Turn
little
your
bit.
hand. Yeah, yeah.
Drop your little finger, Mom.
And that's the one that.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, now
How is
turn your
that?
hand a little more toward the camera. It took the camera a minute to adjust to the.
There you are.
Blessed Mother and their Catholic faith using the rosary. That might be a good, I'll ask you a question here in a moment. You kind of,
Close.
that'll be the crowning jewel, and we'll all in, all done.
Hold on a second, Mike. As long as you're going to do that,
It sure helps to have someone in the living room that knows you too with Kay here, doesn't it? It's easy to speak.
Well, we could go on and on forever about stories that we know together.
Yeah, I thought of that.
That's true.
I thought about your dad coming over
The
with
families were close.
your younger sisters and brother Sebian, and
Mm-hmm.
he had to do his walking routine because of
Oh.
his heart. Just to wrap it up,